Welcome. How are you doing? I hope you're fine and that you enjoy the beautiful day that we were able to, that we have today in London. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here at Queen Mary on behalf of the Milan Institute and the British German Association. We are co-organizing this event, and it has been a great collaboration, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. Well, just to recap a little bit on the background of why today we are gathering today and why this election was unique and important. Well, as you probably know, the German government led by Scholz collapsed in November last year, and the parliament was dismissed. And a new election was called in December, when we saw very interesting things. So in general, a reconfiguration of the party system. We saw an unexpected resuscitation of the Linke when we all thought that it was lost, but they made it through the threshold. We also saw the lowest proportion of votes to the main parties, and we saw new competitors like the AfD rising and becoming more and more important. So this election is not only important for Germany, but it's important for the relationship between Germany and the UK, and also for the future of the European Union and its relationship with their partners. So it is my pleasure to really welcome today Annette Dittert, who is a writer, columnist, filmmaker, and reporter. She is the bureau chief and senior correspondent in London for the German television channel ARD. She is one of Germany and Britain's most prominent commentators on German politics, and was named Political Journalist of the Year in 2019. So, round of applause. It's also my pleasure to welcome today Dr. Sinan Adlingen, who has been head of the United Kingdom and Ireland office of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung since October 2024. Prior to this, she headed the Middle East and North Africa division of the European and International Cooperation Department from 2020. So, also a round of applause. And finally, Professor Daghliu is Professor of Politics at the University of Sussex. He is an expert in German politics, Die Linke, and the legacy of the GDR. He is the co-author of The Left Party in Contemporary German Politics, fantastic book, I can recommend it, and The Politics of the New Germany in 2011, and regularly contributes to British and international media outlets. Also, a round of applause. So, I am going to kickstart this conversation today. We asked the panelists to talk for about 8 minutes, and then we are going to have a discussion and open the floor for some Q&A. So we'll be very okay if we start with you, Annette.
Check. Working? Can you hear me? Yeah, seems to work. Yeah, where do I start? I mean, this last week or these last days in Germany have been quite surprising for many. What happened there, and it's really hard to overestimate how big a seismic shift and change these last days represent. I mean, the kind of complete turnaround when it comes to taking up debts and borrowing, basically breaking the debt brake, although it's theoretically still there, is a complete turnaround from everything that was defined fiscal policy in Germany before this election, and also, interestingly enough, everything what defined Merz's, who will be the next chancellor, the Christian conservative, it's a complete turnaround from what he promised himself during the election campaign, which has been also a big surprise. And I think here lies a little bit of a problem in this situation. But I would just maybe give you a very brief outline. I mean, why this, I personally think, is the right decision, what Merz did. The problem, I don't know how familiar the audience here is with German politics and the debt brake, but maybe I do give you a short outline. The problem any new government would have had, and that was also the reason why the traffic light coalition broke apart in the end, was that Germans that was under Angela Merkel thought it was a good idea to put the so-called debt brake into the constitution, which meant or means that you cannot take up or borrow more than 0.35% of the GDP as debts. And to change the German constitution, like in many countries, you need 2/3 of the parliamentary majority. And when Merz won the election, albeit with a much smaller percentage than he had hoped, he suddenly was confronted with the fact that Die Linke and AfD, so the far left, although it's a democratic socialist party, I would say, but we know more about that, and the far right, which is a non-democratic party who wants to break up constitutional principles in Germany. Both of these parties together have more than a third of the seats in the German parliament, and that means if Merz wanted to do anything to change this kind of debt break or the very limited possibilities, he had to take up new money, which is absolutely needed for infrastructure and for defense now in the new situation with Trump posing up to Putin. Basically, he had to do something before, and that's why this whole thing was so confusing over the last days and weeks for many people who watched it from abroad. He had to change something before the new majority in parliament would be constituted, when it would have been very difficult. I mean, after the new government or the new Bundestag is implemented, it would have been very, very difficult to make these major changes, because the Linke and the far-right AfD would not necessarily have voted for a change in the constitution the way Merz wanted it. So what do we have now? We have now a situation where, which is breathtaking for a German who's been watching fiscal, rather hawkish policy over the last years, where Merz has, and this will be, the final confirmation will come tomorrow in the second chamber, and it's quite probable that it will go through, that Merz will be able to take up 500 billion as a so-called Sondervermögen, as an extra money that he can take up, and then that he can borrow, and then additionally to that there is the kind of the spending cap for defense is basically abolished. So whenever he wants to invest into defense from now on, if that package goes through tomorrow, which is, as I said, highly likely, he will be able to borrow as much money as he basically likes. I mean, obviously not, because he will have to govern in a coalition, but it's a real Zeitenwende. It finally has sunk into the minds of Germans that this is a new era now, and personally I think it's a good thing that Merz did that. The problem I do have with that situation personally is that he promised something completely different before the election. I mean, it's a 180-degree turnaround from what he promised while he was campaigning, and that means that you have a massive erosion of trust within the German public. I think so, yes. Because, I mean, he's just been saying something different from what he's doing now. He can always say, yes, but we didn't know about Trump, but obviously we did know about Trump, so that's not really credible. And also the Linke is in so far a little bit of a problem for him, because it's something that is the result of his own making in a way, because if he hadn't made major mistakes during the election campaign, like trying to get a vote through with the support of the AfD, Die Linke would never have had this kind of rebirth we've seen. They were basically dead as a party. And and Merz was the big helper to get them over the 5% threshold, which now will be a problem for him occasionally. So that's in very, very briefly outlined where we are now, and I think I'll stop here and hand over the microphone to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you. I think Annette gave already a very detailed overview on what the election actually mean for Germany. I want to go actually a step or two back and try to answer the question what actually happened and what it means for Germany's posture in Europe and beyond, and for the new government's posture in Germany. But at the very outset, I should mention, I'm not an academic. I'm not a journalist. I'm representing a political foundation that is closely affiliated with the Christian Democratic Union Party. So I won't claim to be unbiased, impartial, and I would have, however, also not present here alternative facts. So what I'm going to do is maybe try to read what happened through the lens of the CDU's political ambitions. Now, I have here 7 points. I will make it short because a couple of points have been mentioned already. Now, the first thing is that we have to remember it wasn't a resounding victory for the CDU. CDU emerged as a strongest power, but it actually performed its, I think, historical second worst result. The same goes for the Social Democrats. They performed even worse with the historical lowest share of votes. In West Germany, in the western part of Germany, the CDU managed 30+%, but in the east, eastern Länder, could only get 18% of the votes. So this is already, I think, a challenge. And I think it's noteworthy that the CDU performed worse in Angela Merkel's home region, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. Also very telling, right? And my second point is to say that actually this election is a real or major blow to the democratic center. So the mainstream political parties have been weakened. The fringes, well, it's actually an understatement to call them fringe. So they have been strengthened. So the AfD becoming even a dominant political force, and the Linke falling 2% or something before, and then sitting now in the parliament with 8+%. AfD has won in eastern part of the Germany over 14%. It's the leading power in the east. So we have now a political divide in Germany that it's undeniable, and it poses a real long-term challenge. Third point, Annette mentioned the CDU strategy backfired, full stop. Right? And they wanted to get voters, the supporters from AfD, but instead they lost over 1 million voters to the AfD, not gaining a single vote from the AfD.
They should have looked at the Tories first.
Yeah, I mean, it's
never works.
It's actually insane that, you know, no one learns from history. Yeah, that maybe the third point, which also was mentioned, is that now the political center has lost the constitutional majority, which is the first time in the Federal Republic's history, and it's actually, we are almost panicking, I'd say. Next point, we are obviously heading towards a so-called grand coalition, but actually it's not a grand coalition. We have not found yet a good name for it. I'd say it's
Kleine Coalition. Kleiko. Small coalition.
Mini coalition. And why we're saying this, because Germany is familiar with this grand coalition constellation. and then you have two big parties, a huge majority. But now the margin is like what, 13 seats, and then you have the CDU-CSU around 28%, the Social Democrats 16, so they're a junior partner, which would theoretically give Merz more leverage in the coalition government, but it's actually not. Why? Because it's not about overpowering the junior partner, it's about strengthening the political center. So therefore, so we see during the pre-talks to the coalition talks, to the real coalition talk already, they have agreed on 3-4 major issues where they would have normally really significant differences. So it's the debt rate that they now pass, it's the migration question, it's the welfare state issue.
There's a lot of money now as well. They can throw at everything.
Yeah. So, and it's now with the pressure of the Greens, obviously, it's the climate change that stays on the agenda, some sort of a priority, right? Now, my conclusions, why this all happened, is I think Annette, you mentioned it. It's like totally unusual for German standards to have solutions that in such a speed for key political challenges, and then you roll out already policies. We don't know this. So this is totally new. And I think this is the debt break. It is a historic turning point for Germany. It is a very bold break from what actually is conservative in the German setting. And I think this is because there is an acknowledgement, first time really, about real politics. So, and the reaction to that is a strong state, internally and externally. Whether this is the right path, I don't know, but this is how it looks. Now, all this shift is happening basically against the backdrop of major challenges. It's the threat from Russia, is the uncertainties stemming from Washington, right, with the security dilemmas, particularly the future of transatlantic relations. At the same time, it's the challenge from within the AfD as a major power, and certainly also combined with the economic stagnation and the economic and social pressure, right? So I think Merz put it very clearly. He said, we are going to do whatever it takes. So what does that actually mean? It means to take really greater responsibility in defense, in foreign security policy. It means taking risks in transforming the economy, and it means taking or being prepared to take a leadership in Europe and beyond. So we have now a very strong will for change. We have plenty of money, right? I mean the government, not we.
Debt. Yeah.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's money, all right? So you can do something with it.
I'll try that one.
You should do something with it. But what we may not have yet is a real plan, and a roadmap how to implement this plan. So, but I mean, the government is not yet in power. So I think we should remain positive. And I would close by saying Germany is the country to watch.
Thank you, John. Lan?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so much that could be commented on there. Fascinating stuff. The first thing that I wanted to say was about the name of the coalition, actually, because I came back from Berlin a couple of weeks ago and was talking to my students about this, and I was struggling with this grand coalition. It's not very grand, and one of them popped up. Someone, it's the Trinidad coalition, isn't it? I'm like, is he? He said, yeah, it's Trinidad. And he picked, yeah, of course. You got Jamaica coalitions, you got Kenya coalitions. What's the colour? The colours of the Trinidad flag? Red and black. No. And if anyone tells you, okay, I want to copyright it. The Trinidad and Tobago coalition, because the Germans like to name their coalitions after the colours of countries, and Trinidad fits perfectly. So my student came up the other week, and I thought, yeah, I like that, because grand coalition doesn't feel right. It doesn't do justice to the challenges that the German government is going to face. I was going to make four points really quickly. First up, the results on election night were, I think a lot of people were watching with real dread as to what might ultimately happen. Part of that was the AFD, but of course the AFD is 20%, we saw that coming. In many ways that wasn't a surprise. We knew where the AFD was going to end up, more or less. It could have been worse. It could also have been worse if you look at the other smaller parties who didn't get in. Now the FDP, not too many people in Germany were crying into their morning coffees when they realised the FDP hadn't got into Parliament. Not everyone's favourite party, we can go into that later if needs be. But of course the other worry was the Bundeswahlknecht, the Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht, and they missed out by about 13,000 votes, 4.97%. Now the numbers keep shifting, don't they? Not many votes. And then of course they've tried to say that the problems with postal voting that happened in this election mean that they should actually rerun the election again. Now they're not going to get anywhere with that. But the worry was, of course, if those two parties had got in, then what exactly would the coalition have looked like? You wouldn't even have been able to get a coalition together like the one we have now. And the only answers there would have been really difficult answers, particularly with the challenges to Germany's east and over the pond in the Atlantic that we're facing. So it really could have been more challenging than it is now, and I think that's worth remembering. It actually, on election night, and Sophia and I were both in Berlin at the same time, I think there was some sense of relief that a viable coalition was going to be possible, and it didn't have to be that way. The AfD, when we talk much about the AfD, I'm happy to do that rather more in the Q&A, but I think the role of Die Linke is really interesting in this, and they don't get talked about that much here in the UK. One of the things I find most interesting about Die Linke is they had no idea that they were going to do as well as they did. We spoke to a relatively prominent member of Die Linke 2 or 3 days before, and then we said to him, it was going, well, talk us through this, and he just went, don't really know. It's great, but it's all a bit of a surprise, and of course, part of this was that's a bit harsh, a rip-roaring speech that was given in Parliament by Heidi Reichenich, a very sort of formidable speaker, really going for the AfD, really going for Friedrich Merz after he tried to put some ideas forward in the Bundestag about changing immigration laws. That had gone down really well. They'd also pushed a constituency strategy that they were really amazed how well that went, the so-called Mission Silberlock. And Silberlock is it's a Korean fir, isn't it? It's a tree. It's a Korean fir, because Korean firs have slightly grey tinges on the top, and the three guys that were part of Mission Silberlocker were all, I think the combined age, 212 was the combined age of the three of them, so you can sort of get the gist here. But they became sort of culty on the internet. They didn't know anything about it, or they did, but they didn't get it, and they were open in saying it, which led, again, to sort of quite positive reactions. And Die Linke really couldn't have scripted anything like this happening at all. The interesting bit now will be where do they go next? And 1 in 4 young people voted for Die Linke. Die Linke is now the party that has broadly equal vote shares in East and West, which is crazy. Now, they were an Eastern German regional party for the best part of 25 years. They're now the party that does similar in both parts of Germany. If you'd have said that to me 5 years ago, I'd say, you're mad. That's never going to happen. But this is the way German politics has changed. So that, I think Die Linke is an interesting story. I'm intrigued to know whether they can build on this or whether it's as good as it gets. I'm feeling it might be the latter, but we will see. Third point, there's going to be a few election nerds in the room. There always is, and I'm one of them, and that's all good. The electoral system was a constant source of discussion for people like me, because the electoral system had been challenged in the Constitutional Court. There have been various issues with how votes were allocated, how many MPs were in Parliament, and there was a new electoral system in play. So we now, as you all know, Germans have 2 votes, one for a constituency and one for the party. The second one is the more important one, but the first one also can unleash important dynamics. where am I going with all of this? There are now 23 constituencies in Germany out of 299 that don't have an MP, okay, because of the new electoral system. And there's quite a few people who are unhappy about that. So we will see, again, issues of the electoral system in the Federal Constitutional Court. Won't be next week, won't be the week after, but it will happen again. So there's underlying sort of dynamics here that I think will again affect the way that the next German election takes place. And again, if you're in election geek territory like I am, this is really interesting stuff. Two more points. In terms of Merz as Chancellor, I think Merz is going to, well, I think he's in a really intriguing position, stating the obvious, but I don't think there are too many people who are standing cheering that Friedrich Merz is Chancellor. There are a significant number of people in Germany who are not particularly fans of Friedrich Merz, including quite a few people who may well have voted for him. He's been known to drop the odd gaffe. His judgment's been called into question periodically. I mean, it happens with many politicians over the years, but certainly Merz is not the most popular Chancellor imaginable. But I think that's quite common. Helmut Kohl was not seen as being the choice when he became Chancellor of Germany in the early 1980s, and yet he was in power for well over 10 years and is largely, despite a number of bumps in the road, viewed positively. Angela Merkel in the early 1990s, again, she rose to the challenge quite admirably, really. And it will be really interesting to see if Merz does the same. Certainly, he's got challenges to rise to. And I totally agree with my colleagues that he has clearly done that in the first 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, magicking up €1 trillion, that's €1 trillion, when he said he wasn't going to spend any money is quite something to do. So Merz is going to be interesting to see whether he can rise as Kohl and Merkel did in years gone by. I'm also fascinated by his language. When you're talking about Merz saying now's the time, we've got to do stuff. I mean, the next line is "Wir schaffen das," isn't it? Which is exactly what Angela Merkel said in 2015, and yet he often defines himself against Angela Merkel. So there's lots of odd parallels there between him and Merkel, and it'll be interesting to see how long they carry on. The final point, one or two of those points are slightly tongue-in-cheek, but the final point is not tongue-in-cheek. It'd better work. He's really spending a lot of money. We don't really know what exactly he's spending money on. Every mayor in Germany will be able to give him a list of things that they want money spent on, fine. But is there a strategic narrative that's going to see German infrastructure improve, that's going to see the climate change agenda actually move forward? Is the German position on foreign and security policy going to be tenable in the longer term? Because if it doesn't, things could quite quickly turn very, very difficult for Friedrich Merz. There is a lot of debt in the game. The economy needs to function. These goals need, at least broadly, to be met. Because if they don't, then let's not beat about the bush. The barbarians are at the gates. They got 20% this time. They're not in power now. If everything goes wrong, ... So we better get it right. That's a bit morbid. Didn't really want to say more, but I firmly believe it's true.
You can keep it because I have my own. Thank you so much. This is a fascinating, really very nice discussion. So I'm going to kickstart with some questions that I have, and please feel free to choose who would like to answer this question. But I'm linking what Andrew said about the security threats, and we are seeing a complete, something that was, and we knew that Trump was going to be there, but what we are seeing is a relationship between the US and Russia that, it's a new reconfiguration. And Ukraine is around the corner from Germany, so this issue is really playing a key role in German politics. So what do you think is going to be, happening in this regard? How is security going to be looked at from the future, from the new government? Maybe Annette, do you want to go first?
Yeah, as we've already mentioned, with this massive amount of money and with this kind of addition in the constitution that you can take up as many debts as you want for defense, Germany is now back as the major player when it comes to investment in the defense industry, which it never was. Also mentally, Germany was never really ready to give up its complacency about not rearming, which was complacency in the end. It was a good thing after the war for all the reasons you know. But it had become over the last years also some kind of lazy mindset. And now this has completely changed. So now Germany can and will be again this kind of engine at the heart of Europe. And the main question now is how much will Friedrich Merz will be able to rebuild the relationships with France, with Poland, that have been really neglected under the traffic light coalition, which partly had also to do with the rather disastrous, non-communicative style of Olaf Scholz, who really did nothing to build these alliances. And Merz, I'm quite confident, will do that much better. He has already been in Warsaw twice or three times to rebuild relationships with Tusk. They were extremely bad with Scholz in a time where that would have been really important. So my hope would be for now that he will really make an effort to rebuild alliances within Europe. But then again, when it comes to defense, there are the EU debt rules that have to be tackled and discussed. And then also the other big question is what happens with the cooperation with the UK, because I think it was today that France finally insisted and got this policy as a proposition through that defense will be, the big new defense pot will have to be, that the UK cannot be part of it. And this is not yet a policy, but that's a proposition that is on the table now in Brussels, which is a major setback for Starmer's attempts to join the EU. And I think it's really important that this does not remain a purely EU thing, defense, because there's problems with Orban, with the Slovakian PM who will block everything. Meloni, we don't know. So I think the most important thing when it comes to defense is that Merz, as quickly as possible, as soon as he's chancellor, tries to rebuild relationship with those countries who have a clear stance towards Russia, and helps Britain to get in, because this cannot remain a purely EU-centered attempt now, because this won't work. The EU is in trouble in that regard, because there is already too many pro-Putin players or pro-Trump players like Meloni in there. So that will be the interesting thing. Germany is back in a way at the heart of this, but it has to make sure that this is a bigger group that joins this kind of support group for Ukraine than just the EU as such.
Maybe very briefly on defense. In Germany, we tend to do the. I'm supposed to kiss it?
Close.
It's really close. Okay, so in Germany, we tend to do the third step before we do the first step. What do I mean with that is, yes, Germany wants to take, and this government, the next government wants to take a greater responsibility. But for what exactly? Is it about putting lots of money on the table to buy American products, defense products, to keep the American engaged in Europe? Is it about spending the money in Europe so the European economy gets boosted? Or is it about balancing the rivalries between the UK and France? So what? I think we're not there yet with our strategic thinking. Yes, we started 2022 with the shift in the mindset, but we don't know yet what we want to do. What is actually the ultimate goal, strategic goal of Germany? How should Germany's posture in Europe look like? What do we stand for? And I think there we are, would love to keep the status quo. Nothing changes, Americans back, and everything calm. But I think the new government rhetorically commits to taking risks, and taking risks means also taking position. But we don't know yet whether whether Germany will actively participate in securing peace in Ukraine. We don't know. So therefore, I think we shouldn't be we shouldn't keep our expectations too high for the time.
Though with that kind of money, they should be able to do something.
Yeah, I buy into that, so there's no need to repeat it, really. But I would say that, you know, was it Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones who said that you don't always get what you want, but you sometimes get what you need? And maybe Trump is what Germany needed to wake it out of that slumber, so that it can change to stay the same. And I think, actually, Merz has a great opportunity now. But the strategic dimension, he's obviously not had time to think about this in any great detail. That's the key thing. You can easily fritter away €1 trillion. I don't think I've actually said that, but you can fritter away $1 trillion. But you could, and that would be really, really bad for Merz and for Germany. I think one plus for Merz is he's not Scholz. I said before that I thought, you know, Helmut Kohl.
Fortunately, not many Scholzes.
Well, yes, yeah. Helmut Kohl and Angela Merkel surprised many, whereas Scholz was in a completely different position. He'd been part of previous governments, he'd been widely successful in Hamburg, where he's from, and yet I found him incredibly disappointing as a chancellor. He on all sorts of levels, and I'd go into rant mode there, so I'll just leave it. But I think in terms of dealing with foreign partners, Scholz left an awful lot to be desired, and I suspect Merz, as and when he makes mistakes, he probably won't be in that regard. I think he's more of a communicator than Scholz ever has been, and that he's got to use that. And it's a plus for Germany. They've got someone who can do that when Scholz so obviously could not.
Great, so now I'm going to turn to a fascinating topic for people interested in elections and voting behavior, etc. So what we are seeing is a clear divide between old and new, regional divide as well, in the way that people are voting. And we are seeing two important players here, one very much on the left and the other in the right. In this context, are we seeing the death of the big two parties, or are we seeing what are the challenges that these stronger competitors now are placing for the main two parties that traditionally have been the main, like the ones that conglomerate the majority of the votes, but we are not seeing as strong now. I don't know, maybe you want to start?
Sure, I'll kick off with that one. I think the major challenge for the parties in power is a very, very straightforward one. Okay, at least in terms of identifying the problem. One of the main reason that Germans were unhappy with the parties in front of them is that the last government was so woeful. The last government was awful at communication. The last government seemed to prevaricate all the time. It argued with itself day in, day out. Now, we can argue about who was responsible for that. Was it Christian Lindner, Annette Dittert? Was it Scholz always thinking he's right? Well, whatever it was, the impression it gave was of dysfunction and of an inability to do more or less everything. So the next government has to govern better than that. It has to be really, really dull. It has to be really, really boring. It has to get stuff done and find ways to find majorities in Parliament and don't fall out in public. It's politics 101, really. Now, I grant you, solving the Ukraine crisis is not politics 101. That's a bit more tricky. But the government can deal with these things in a much better way. So the first port of call is to make sure that they get their ducks in order. Govern like adults. Don't fall apart. And if you can meet those basic credentials, then I think over time, Germans cannot help but give you a little bit more credit than they gave the previous administration.
It's also really difficult to get any worse than the previous.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think what is important is that what you said in the beginning, the centre lost the constitutional majority. I mean, that is quite a problem, potentially. What my biggest worry is that if you look at the numbers, I mean, the majority voted centre, right, and right. What Germany gets now is basically this, a government that is a conservative government that is very much dependent on his coalition partner, who is the Social Democrats again, so centre-left. And it will need support from the Greens or Die Linke, because they have said they would not want support from the AfD anymore. So while a majority of Germans have voted for the far right and the centre-right, the way it will be governed again will be centre-left. And I think the moment they make mistakes, or the moment this government looks dysfunctional again, the AfD will rightly say, Merz, who told you he would close the borders during the election campaign, is now ruling another traffic light coalition. He has lied to you. You see, the centre doesn't hold its promises. The centre can deliver the centre right. And they will attack Friedrich Merz, the AfD, the far right, will attack Friedrich Merz big time. They have already started that. And they have quite good arguments for that he delivered himself, because he led such a he's led a very, very right election campaign. I mean, during the campaign he claimed he would close the borders on day one and all that kind of nonsense, fully knowing that he would not ever have been able to do that, because it was always clear that the CDU, the Christian Conservatives, would not get a majority that would make it possible for him to govern alone. So he knew he would have to form a coalition. He knew these promises wouldn't be deliverable. He knew this wasn't compatible with EU law. I mean, that was really something I was looking at it during the campaign, and I thought, what the hell is he doing? And as you said, I mean, he lost at least 2% to the AfD with this kind of campaign. If he had ever watched my reports from here on the Tories, he hasn't, obviously, he would have known that this doesn't work. And that was, for me, a little bit shocking. As you said, they never learn from history, apparently. And centre-right parties who do such a thing endanger themselves. The end of the story is always that they get eaten up by the far right, who always moves even further to the right. And this danger, although everybody, and that's true what you said, is quite relieved at the moment in Germany about the outcome of the election, it could have been much, much worse if Sarah Wagenknecht would have come in, and the majority would have been so complicated for him to get together that Germany might have become ungovernable, which has thankfully not happened, but still people tend to forget at the moment how vulnerable this new coalition will be and how strong the AfD is, and they have quite good arguments when it comes to he lied to you, because there is a considerable erosion of trust when it comes to Merz. I've just seen a poll today that only a third of Germans think he will be a good chancellor, and only 25% said they would trust him. That is not good for the culture of democracy. And the moment they get something wrong and it doesn't work, they'll be in a very difficult situation. So I'm a bit worried about the kind of danger there is that at the moment everything looks like, okay, fine, they will be able to govern and they have a lot of money. And as I said, I personally think it was the right decision to end this debt brake. It was really nonsense while German bridges were falling apart to still insist on saving money. I mean, that was so weird when I looked at it from here, from Britain. But I think it will be very quickly quite a dangerous, difficult situation if they don't get things right.
Great. Shannon, do you have something to
Just a sentence. Just a comment on the Tories. Yes. They keep repeating their own mistakes over and over again, right? And still we're witnessing some. Yeah. But I think we have a general problem with the centre-right across Europe. The centre-right is lacking a convincing narrative that is able to get the people moved to a future that looks brighter, and whatever it is, right? I mean, there's no real policy, there's no real idea, there's no vision. So, but this goes for all conservatives across Europe. I just wanted to make.
Great. So coming to that similarity or dissimilarity between elections in the UK and Germany, I am going to jump into the next point. And basically, I would like to ask or to touch into the issue of the implications that this new election has for the relationship between the UK and Germany. And in concrete, whether you are we likely to see any changes in Britain post-Brexit relationship with Europe, now that the withdrawal agreement is going to be technically revisited, and what can we expect from the German leadership there? Yes.
Very brief. I think that doesn't depend on the German government. whether there is a change or not a change. That depended on the government here. Because there is a common sense in Germany, and that is not, has nothing to do with political party or political party colors. So it's, for Germany, it's always important to have good relations in Europe and around Europe. So, but the Brexit came with a real break with regard to the relations, and now we are seeing exactly the opposite. The first country he visited was Germany, and then he came up with the initiative of this, bilateral, once in a generation, internationally binding agreement, which is waiting to be signed by the incoming German government. So there is a clear interest, a strong interest from the British side to engage more with Germany, and Germany is just happy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think any German government would welcome a Starmer who would be a bit less cautious, let's put it that way, when it comes to getting closer to the EU. I mean, it would be always welcome, and Friedrich Merz is in a very similar position there than any other politician. This is, I think, the interesting question now. I mean, Starmer's attempt to re-establish or get closer to Europe or to the EU again via the little detour defense, which I thought is a very clever way of sort of calming down the post-Brexit atmosphere, is difficult, because if France insists, again, I've already touched on that, but if France insists on not having Britain as part of an EU defense spending pot, it will be, the German role will be quite crucial, whether they can moderate or get the French on board. I mean, this is all pretty fresh now, it just came in today, but I think Germany could help, hopefully, to get Britain somehow into an alliance, what Starmer also wants. And then once you have closer relationships there, that is, from what I understand, Starmer's hope, you will start being able to solve other things as well. But again, I agree with you. I mean, this is mostly a question that has to be tackled here.
Yeah, I've only got 1 or 2 lines on that, and I think that the German government, like any government, has only got so much headspace. There are so many things going on, and I think it's prepared to make a bit more headspace to talk to Britain about post-Brexit issues, but the initiative's got to come from Britain, and they've got to be reasonably meaningful within the context of possible. And if that happens, and I thoroughly agree, I think the German government will be very keen to listen.
Great. So thank you so much. I think that it's time to open the floor for some questions from the public.